On today's show, Houston Rockets coaching search updates, why it appears that Frank Vogel is possibly the frontrunner to be the Houston Rockets' next head coach. But another consideration, could Ime Udoka and Jaylen Brown as a package duo be something that the Rockets have to consider? NBA playoff predictions, and yes, I am wearing an eye patch.
Oh my.
All of that and more coming right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll have an Easter egg for the YouTube comments later in the show, as well as if you want to know what actually happened to my eye, but you got to stick through the whole show to get to that point. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym, slacking off from work, whenever you listen to the show. Thank you for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. A lot to get to in today's episode. Some updates on the Houston Rockets coaching search, why it appears right now that Frank Vogel is the front runner as far as coaching candidates that the Rockets have interviewed, and kind of my understanding of where the candidates kind of stack up compared to one another, at least at this point in the process, as well as the idea that it might be possible for the Rockets to get a 2-for-1 deal, a 2-for-1 package, if you will, with Ime Udoka and possibly Jaylen Brown. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, as well as NBA playoff predictions and the eye patch story. Got to get to all of that. So let's go ahead and start off with coaching search updates for your Houston Rockets. So we did know that Frank Vogel interviewed recently. That interview is taken care of. There's a number of other names that are on the deck for the Rockets to interview with. They've gotten permission to interview Kenny Atkinson, Sam Cassell, among others, as far as assistants around the league. Adrian Griffin is another one with the Toronto Raptors. And so let me just try and unpack at least what I understand right now about what's been going on. So first off, Frank Vogel apparently absolutely crushed it in his interview with the Rockets. Internally, they were very, very impressed about what he had to say, and the resume kind of matches the interview, right? Like, of all the candidates the Rockets are potentially going to be looking at this offseason, he has the most established resume of any candidate. Some might argue that Nick Nurse has a more established resume, but I think that when you look at Frank Vogel's entire body of work as a head coach, the success that he had with those Indiana teams back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, he had a lot of success there. He had a little bit of a blip during his stint in Orlando, and then he had a lot of success with the Lakers despite dealing with injuries at times to his star players with LeBron and AD. But apparently, he completely crushed it in the interview. And I've said it before, I'm not as high on Vogel as he relates to some of the other candidates on this list. I do think that he would answer a lot of questions and address a lot of the issues that this Rockets team currently faces. And the more that I think about it, the more that I'm warming up to the idea of Frank Vogel as the next head coach, with the caveat that if you bring in Frank Vogel as the head coach, you have to find a top-tier offensive assistant to pair with him. Because, again, I do have my reservations about what he brings to the table from an offense creativity standpoint. But I'm also a firm believer of the idea that it's a lot easier for, let me put it this way, trying to figure out how to get these thoughts out, because there's a lot of them, right? There's so much weighing on this coaching search for the Rockets and getting this decision right. And I've got so many thoughts, feelings, emotions about this whole situation. For me, I think it's harder for coaches to get defensive production out of players than it is for them to get offensive production out of them. Or it's harder to elevate a team defensively than it is to elevate a team offensively, because in today's NBA, so much about NBA offense is just dictated by whether or not you have talent, right? Talent wins out, right? We've seen games just this past season where this Rockets team looks incredible because they're just talented, right? There's moments where Jalen or Kevin or Alp, whoever, they hit a tough shot or an insane bucket just because they're that incredibly talented, right? You can have a beautiful offensive system with a lot of structure, with a lot of actions and off-ball movement, whatever. You can do all that. But at the end of the day, it boils down to, will guys hit shots? And when the going gets tough, right, when it comes winning time and it's crunch time, when you're in playoff basketball, whatever, the most talented players win out. That's why it's really hard to win in today's NBA without having legitimate, bona fide star players. Now, the other side of that is defense is about buy-in. Defense is about commitment. It's about buying into a scheme and identity. It's about lifting each other up, all of that. And I do think from that perspective, it's a lot easier for a defensive head coach or a guy with a bit more of a defensive track record to make his mark on a team and elevate a team defensively and still find a moderate amount of success offensively than the inverse, where a guy is exclusively trying to elevate his team offensively and then doesn't really have the ability to motivate or inspire or coach on the defensive side, scheme, whatever you want to call it. So from that perspective, I'm actually, at this point, I'm kind of leaning more so towards one of those candidates, either a Vogel, an Udoka, a Nurse, all guys who kind of have this defensive track record about them, probably more so than I am a Kenny Atkinson type, at least at this point. And as far as where I feel like the Rockets are leaning with their coaching search, I would probably rank right now, Vogel is the front runner, right? He's also, of those four names, he's the only guy that's interviewed currently. The Rockets still have to do their interview with Ime Udoka. They still have to wait and see what ultimately happens with the Toronto Raptors and Nick Nurse, and whether or not that ultimately, that separation ultimately happens to allow Nick Nurse the opportunity to interview for the position. And then they still have to interview Kenny Atkinson. But at least right now, the way that I would rank it, as far as my understanding of interest between different parties, I would say it probably goes Vogel 1, Udoka 2, Nurse 3, pending what happens with the Raptors, and then Atkinson last of those four guys. At least right now, that's what I think is going on. And again, some of this is still pending Ime Udoka's interview. Some of it's still pending the Raptors situation with Nick Nurse. And as far as those guys go, it's my understanding that the Rockets have done their due diligence on the Udoka situation. They vetted him, and they still have to do the actual interview. But as far as any of the off the court concerns that may follow Ime Udoka to wherever he coaches next, everything is on the up and up there. And then with Nick Nurse, there are some legitimate concerns about what's kind of gone on or gone wrong, I guess, with the Raptors these past few years after some really high level success out of the gate with a title, with a follow-up year that was really good where they fell a little bit short, all of that. There are some legitimate concerns about why things have gone so wrong in Toronto, despite the fact that they have a pretty solid amount of talent. They had the Rookie of the Year, Scotty Barnes, all these different things. And so the Rockets definitely need to do their due diligence there to figure out exactly what happened. And I believe that it's a possibility that one of the reasons that they're actually interviewing assistant coach Adrian Griffin from the Raptors is potentially to pry and dig a little bit to try and find out exactly what's been going on in that Raptors locker room, to kind of covertly get a little bit of a sense, an idea of what happened and why there was maybe some fallout between Nurse and the players, and really to get it to paint a better picture and to really kind of influence, or I guess educate them a little bit better on their potential decision as it relates to Nick Nurse, should he become available as one of the candidates. So those are the coaching search updates that I've got, things that I've heard as far as direction, things that the team is considering. Coming up, I do want to get into this idea, though, that Ime Udoka and Jaylen Brown could potentially be a package deal that the Rockets might have to actually consider as far as one of the variables that they consider when it comes to hiring their next head coach. Bill Simmons good friend of Rockets fans everywhere, with a little golden nugget for Rockets fans to feast on this offseason. We're going to get to that in just one moment, but first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Joel Embiid to score more than 26.5 points? What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Kevin Durant to have less than 6.5 assists, or maybe Steph Curry to have more than 3.5 3-pointers made? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you're going to win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA. They've got you covered for all the action. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's talk a little bit about Ime Udoka and Jaylen Brown. Now, why is this? Well, first off, obviously, Ime Udoka is one of the candidates that the Rockets are going to be interviewing as their potential next head coach. And there are a lot of considerations that come with Ime Udoka. There's the concerns about his off-the-court issues, which, again, referencing segment 1, it seems like the Rockets have done their due diligence, and, again, they wouldn't be entertaining him as a potential head coaching candidate if they hadn't already done their due diligence. So I do commend them for that. So at this point, it looks like it's all just basketball concerns. Does Ime Udoka fit as a basketball coach for this Rockets team? Pending his interview, right now, Vogel leading the way very clearly, but pending Udoka's interview, there's a chance, I think, that he has to potentially leapfrog Frank Vogel in the standings and potentially become the front runner as the favorite to land this position. Now, Jaylen Brown is a name that Rockets fans have had their eyes on for quite some time, ever since there was some unrest in Boston about his role, playing alongside Jason Tatum. Can those two guys coexist as co-stars, all that good stuff? And there have been copious amounts of Photoshops done, Jaylen Brown in a Rockets jersey, all this stuff. So with that, let's take a look at something that happened recently that kind of paints another picture as to whether or not the Rockets should, consider that hiring Ime Udoka may have the added benefit of acquiring a Jaylen Brown further down the line. Maybe it's not quite as direct as a sign Ime Udoka and trade for Jaylen Brown immediately, but if bringing in Ime Udoka is what ultimately opens the doorway for a Jaylen Brown further down the line, then that's something you have to consider if you're the Houston Rockets, right? And good friend of the podcast, none other than the Ringer's Bill Simmons, was on his podcast with Brian Windhorst discussing Jaylen Brown's future, and this is what those two had to say about that.
Market value contract. So let's say you find a beautiful trade with Team X for Jaylen Brown because you don't want to pay him. Team X can't offer a trade like they know they're going to keep him because
and then he's unhappy that he didn't get the max. Yeah.
Or even if he gets to that place and he's like, oh my God, I've dreamed every day of my life to be in City X and I love playing with player Y.
Houston.
You should absolutely not sign. It's a gap in the rule, and it's still going to be a gap, it looks like, even in the new CBA.
So, Brian Windhorst, Bill Simmons, talking about Jaylen Brown and his future in Boston, signing an extension, new contract, all that stuff. And for what it's worth, it is hilarious that, some Rockets fans choose to, whenever Bill Simmons has, or Windhorst or any of the national media guys have anything negative to say about the team, Rockets fans immediately want to reject it, disregard it. Oh, national media narrative, this, that, and the other thing, right? Anti-Houston bias, everything. But then when something like this pops up, where you hear Bill Simmons, of all people, who you can doubt Simmons's connections with other organizations, how plugged in he may or may not be. I for one, believe that he is incredibly plugged in and know that he's incredibly plugged in. The one organization you cannot doubt his connections with are the Celtics, right? He's basically a Celtics homer through and through. So if Bill Simmons is begrudgingly, woefully saying the word Houston as a possible destination for Jaylen Brown, one of the stars on his beloved Boston Celtics, you take that and maybe you don't take it all the way straight to the bank and cash that check, but you take that with some heavy consideration that there might be some legitimacy behind why Bill Simmons uttered that singular word during Windhorst's little rant about what Jaylen Brown's contract could look like. So maybe there's some serious legs there. Maybe Bill Simmons is hearing some things about Jaylen Brown and his interest in, moving to a new spot, a new team, possibly being the face of a new team. Now, it'd be very curious, right? If you did bring Jaylen Brown into this mix in Houston with this young group of guys, it's not like he would be the franchise guy. I mean, the franchise tag is basically going to Jalen Green, right? He is the future face of the franchise. He's already the face of the franchise, basically, right? But it's kind of a shared role between him and currently Kevin Porter Jr., in all the promo materials, all that stuff. Jabari is probably going to be another guy that gets added into that. And depending on who elevates to a superstar level, be it Jalen or Jabari further down the line or whatever, right? Like, the Rockets can alter their marketing a little bit, but having an established all-star like Jaylen Brown at the forefront of the Houston Rockets charge, right? Somebody who can be the vocal, the emotional leader of the team, who's been there, done that, had a significant amount of success throughout his career, and has the play to back it up, would do wonders for this Rockets locker room. Maybe that's something he's looking for, right? A place where he can lead a team of his own. And again, it's weird because it's not like he'd be coming to Houston to be the alpha, or at least he'd be the alpha right out of the gate, but not necessarily long-term, depending on how Jalen, Jabari, how those guys progress throughout their careers, depending on what happens with this upcoming draft pick with the Rockets. If they draft a Scoot Henderson or Wembanyama, right? I mean, at what point does the team become theirs, right? Maybe they're the franchise guy further down the line. But it's curious nonetheless that the Rockets are heavily in the running for Ime Udoka, Jaylen Brown's ex-head coach, who he had, a very strong connection with, right? It's worth noting that in the aftermath of the Udoka situation, Jaylen Brown said a lot of different things about just his connection with Udoka and what he meant to him as a player. In fact, it's worth reading back right now. So these are some of the comments from Jaylen Brown. Since the start of the season, it's kind of been a whirlwind of emotions, said Jaylen Brown. We've been able to reconcile and win games despite the loss of the presence of Ime Udoka. He was great in our locker room. He was a leader in our locker room. He held it down. He brought us together defensively, helped us get over that hump and get to the finals. I want to see him back on his feet. I said it before, and I'll say it again. All right, so some strong words from Jaylen Brown about Udoka. And, this isn't the only occasion. This isn't the only little, blurb of Jaylen Brown talking about Udoka and what he meant to him as a coach. And very clearly, there is a strong connection, a strong relationship between those two guys. And again, that was a really tough hurdle for that Celtics locker room to kind of overcome with losing Udoka. And they managed to get back on their feet this season. Joe Mazzulla has done an incredible job with that roster. But it's very possible that for a guy like Jaylen Brown, maybe Mazzulla's not resonating as much, right? Maybe he misses the connection that he had with Udoka. And so it's worth noting that as Udoka is one of the candidates for the Houston Rockets, and with Bill Simmons chiming in his concern about Jaylen Brown leaving for a possible destination like Houston, then maybe there's something here in these tea leaves, something to consider, something that the Rockets are, should at least have on their radar, that if they do manage to land Ime Udoka, maybe it makes it more of a realistic possibility to either outright sign Jaylen Brown next offseason, should they have the cap space to do so. Maybe they sign somebody to a 1+1. Maybe they, kind of roll over their cap space to next summer to be able to have the financial flexibility to be in the game for Jaylen Brown. Or possibly, and here's an idea, if they get Udoka and Udoka is fairly positive, behind the scenes, whatever, that he could convince Jaylen Brown, and you get like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like he's going to sign an extension or he'll sign a fresh contract in Houston, then maybe you have the confidence to actually trade for a guy like that and get him either this offseason or at the deadline ahead of NBA free agency and just make him a part of the team sooner rather than later. Now, what would that even look like if you're the Houston Rockets? First off, why would you want to give up assets for a player that you think you could, conceivably pursue next offseason as a free agent? It's tough, right? It's tough to try and figure out what direction would be the best case scenario to go. As far as a possible trade permutation, though, the Rockets could easily match Jaylen Brown's salary pretty easily with some combination of Kevin Porter Jr., Jae'Sean Tate, and then maybe you throw in one of the other young guys, maybe a KJ Martin or a Josh Christopher or a Usman Garuba, and that gets you to Jaylen Brown's roughly $30 million salary. So matching money is not necessarily the hard part. The idea, though, is if the Celtics are going to lose Jaylen Brown for nothing, right? If he's threatening to walk in the offseason, then you'd like to at least recoup some value for him. And if you're the Rockets, rather than necessarily having to worry about rolling over the cap space to next summer or something like that, you could just outright trade for him. Now, assuming, again, you have the wink, wink, nudge, nudge handshake deal that he's going to re-sign, because that's the scary part. He's only under contract for one more year. And the fear for any team that is pursuing a Jaylen Brown trade, assuming the Celtics don't want to pay him or assuming he doesn't want to be there anymore, is that he could walk in free agency. So this is just something to consider as far as the Rockets head coaching search, and not only the fact that Ime Udoka is an incredibly qualified candidate. Again, right now, I think he's number 2 on the Rockets board as far as who they'd like to be the next head coach of this team, pending his interview. So he has the chance to maybe leapfrog Frank Vogel and get to that number 1 spot on the Rockets board. But if you could also get a star-studded player or a star caliber player like Jaylen Brown, in addition to adding a top-tier coach like Ime Udoka, I think that might be enough to kind of push him over the edge a little bit, push him a little bit forward, and give him just a little bit of extra consideration as the possible next head coach of the Houston Rockets. So, coming up, want to get into playoff predictions here at Locked On Rockets. We'll take a 10,000-foot view, kind of scale out away from the Houston Rockets and just lay out some predictions for this year's NBA postseason, as well as, hey, I owe you guys an explanation for the eye patch. We're going to get there in just one moment, but first, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugar and the calories that usually comes along with it, then you need to try the best tasting protein bar on the market. That's Built Bar. You've got to try it. Every single protein bar that they serve is, first off, they're all covered in 100% delicious chocolate, real chocolate on every single bar, right? And they come in so many amazing flavors. You've got cookies and cream, strawberry, raspberry, salted caramel, peanut butter brownie, my personal favorite, coconut brownie chunk. You really can't go wrong with a single flavor on their menu. Every single bar is low cal, low sugar, high protein, high fiber, amazing if you're on a keto diet, amazing if you're trying to cut back a little bit, lose a little bit of weight, and you can walk into your local Walmart, Sam's Club, wherever, and just grab a box right off the shelf. But if you're not an in-person buyer, if you want to get them online, you can do that too. Just visit built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your very next order of the best tasting protein bars on the market. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off at built.com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. I do want your thoughts. I want your thoughts every episode. I read through those comments every single day on the YouTube side, and I try to, if anybody DMs me on Twitter, @s me on Twitter, I try to read all of it. You may not see a reaction to it because I get a lot of messages, but I do try to read every single comment. And with that, I do want your thoughts. I want your thoughts on the Rockets coaching search. What are your thoughts about Frank Vogel being the apparent frontrunner right now? What are your thoughts about potentially Ime Udoka and Jaylen Brown being a package deal that the Rockets might have to consider and take into account as they're choosing their next head coach? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But I do want to get to NBA playoff predictions, right? It's that wonderful time of year. We've made it through the NBA play-in tournament, which was really exciting. Some really good games being played there. And we're now into the postseason. It's that time of year, and the Rockets are not in the postseason for the third year in a row. It's tough if you're a Rockets fan, and hopefully they'll be back there sooner rather than later, but it's worth noting at least. I like to be able to, drop my predictions, and I want your predictions as well. Share your predictions for the postseason in the YouTube comments. Share them with me on Twitter, all that, because then if you get some of these right, you got bragging rights, right? You can come back and you can flaunt them. You can say, hey, I called this series, or I called this finals matchup, whatever it may be. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in here. We'll start with my Western Conference predictions first. So let me pull them up right here. In the West, for the first round, I've got the Denver Nuggets over the Minnesota Timberwolves in 5 games. I've got the Lakers actually knocking out the Memphis Grizzlies in 6 games. For the 3-6 matchup, I've got the Sacramento Kings winning against the Golden State Warriors in 7 games. And then in the 4-5 matchup, I've got the Phoenix Suns over the Clippers in 6 games. Then moving on to the semifinals, I've got the Phoenix Suns against the Denver Nuggets. I've got Phoenix taking it in 6 games. This was a tough one for me. I was really torn on this series, but ultimately I'm settling on the Suns to actually go all the way in the Western Conference, which is a bit of a spoiler there for the Western Conference final prediction. But I do have the Lakers over the Kings in 5 games. I think the Lakers are just going to turn it up to another level here in the playoffs, assuming, again, this is all assuming health across the board, right? No major injuries to anybody. I think LeBron and AD with their supporting cast is going to be really, really tough to stop in this year's playoffs. So I've got Lakers over Kings in 5 games in the semifinals. And then coming out of the Western Conference, I've got the Phoenix Suns over the LA Lakers in 7 games. So that's my Western Conference breakdown with the graphic if you're watching on YouTube. And then for the Eastern Conference, in that 1-8 matchup, I've got Milwaukee sweeping the Miami Heat. That is, I think that's just a foregone conclusion at this point. Milwaukee's such a dominant team, and Miami is just not the same team that they used to be. In the 2-7 matchup, I've got Boston against Atlanta. I've got Boston advancing in 5 games. That one seems pretty easy to me. I've got Cleveland in 7 over the New York Knicks. And I really like Cleveland in the East. It's just unfortunate for them that they're going to have to walk into the buzzsaw that is the Milwaukee Bucks in the following round. And then in the 3-6 matchup, I've got Philadelphia over Brooklyn in 6 games. So in the semifinals, I've got Milwaukee Bucks in 6 over the Cavaliers. And then I've got Boston in 6 over James Harden and the Sixers, which could behoove the Houston Rockets, as James Harden, not making it past the semifinals with the Sixers could mean his end as a Philadelphia 76er and possibly the return back to his Houston Rockets roots. So we'll see how that plays out. So there's a little bit of an ulterior motive with that prediction, although I do think it's true. I think we're headed for a Bucks Celtics finals, or I should say Eastern Conference finals. And then ultimately I've got Milwaukee over Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals, which leads me to the finals prediction. Suns versus Bucks rematch in the finals, with the two teams looking very different than they were when they fought in the finals previously. And ultimately, I'm going to go with Phoenix in 7. I think Phoenix ultimately wins it out. And that is my ultimate prediction for this postseason, how things ultimately play out, where the chips ultimately fall. I want to know your thoughts, though. So far, and I was keeping track. I didn't get my predictions out before the first round of playoff games took place on Saturday, and I apologize for that. Clearly, I'm dealing with this eye issue. But with that, I wanted to make sure I got my predictions out there, because a lot of my predictions line up with a lot of Kevin O'Connor's predictions, and he tends to be pretty on the money. And that was I made my predictions at 2 a.m. on Thursday without looking at anybody else's thoughts. So we'll see ultimately where mine fall compared to some of the other pundits out there. And again, I want your predictions, right? Am I completely off base here picking the Suns and the Bucks to come out of their respective conferences? Am I being unfair to any of these teams? Did I completely write anybody off that I shouldn't have? Was I too aggressive in any of my series predictions? Give me your feedback in the comments, because I'm so curious to hear what you guys think, because it's always, we talk about the Rockets constantly here. Obviously, the show is called Locked on Rockets, but taking a look at other fan bases and other organizations and kind of the perspectives that we might share and the difference of opinions that we might have as it regards to other organizations, it's always a ton of fun. Also, we should probably adopt a team here at Locked on Rockets to maybe follow through the postseason. And I feel bad in the fact that I had them knocked out in the second round, but I'd be totally down to like root for and follow the Sacramento Kings, like the beam, all that good stuff throughout this postseason. That said, I'm not going to, predict them to make the finals just because, beam team. Like I'm trying to be realistic with my predictions, but I might follow them along a little bit, and we might do some little breakdowns on what the Sacramento Kings have going on, or maybe we follow another team. Maybe we follow the Sixers with James Harden. Who knows? But with that, those are my playoff predictions for this year's NBA postseason. And now that we're here at the tail end of the episode, I owe you guys an explanation for the eye patch.
Oh my.
But before I give you guys an explanation for the eye patch, what I need from you, I want your best eye patch related humor, jokes, whatever, anything funny that you've got to say about the eye patch. I want it in the YouTube comments or at me on Twitter. Give me your best shot with the eye patch, because I feel like I look like a knockoff Nick Fury, or I feel like I'm like maybe loosely associated, like me and Ryan Anderson are the real like Splash Brothers, like we're the Rockets version of the like retinally challenged Splash Brothers for the Houston Rockets, because obviously there's the running joke about Ryan Anderson having been colorblind and not being able to shoot inside Toyota Center because of all the red. And then I've got the one eye, so clearly I've got like depth perception issues right now. So that's what I've got. But no, it's the actual reason. I do want your fake reasons in the YouTube comments, because I could use a good laugh about this. And I also have a date Tuesday night, and I need like a really good excuse. I need a really good fake story to tell my date about why I'm wearing an eye patch. So let's give me some good material to work with. But with that, I have a sty. For the first time in my life, I have a sty. And I've never had one before, and I realize now why sty rhymes with die, because that's all I've wanted to do throughout this process, because my eye has like swollen up completely to the point that it's like almost swollen shut, and it hurts, and it's like not like painful. It's not like actual pain. It's like that moderately annoying pain that's like just noticeable enough where it's like really annoying. And so effectively I'm wearing the eye patch because I'm basically like a dog that gets a surgery done and you have to put the cone on, because otherwise they'll like scratch and like bite at themselves and like all that stuff. I kept like touching my eye. I kept like messing with it, and it kept like making it inflamed and worse and all that stuff. So I was just like, I just need the eye patch. Plus I've got some like medicine on it, so that's like helping. But yeah, so that's why I'm wearing an eye patch. That's why I look like a pirate on today's episode, and probably for couple episodes, foreseeable future, at least until this thing goes back to normal and until I have the use again of my second eye. But with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. As always, thank you guys so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Drop your comments about the Rockets head coaching search, about the ranking of the potential head coaching candidates, about Udoka and Jaylen Brown as potentially a package duo. Give me your best jokes about Eye Patch Gatlin, please. And I'll be reading these off my iPhone. I'll be reading the YouTube comments as I set sail across the seven seas on the Black Pearl pirate ship, whatever, alongside Captain Jack Sparrow, all that good stuff. But with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.